Hi everyone, and welcome to The Climate of Sport with me, Claire Poole, the podcast where we explore how the world of sport can drive climate action, champion equality and shape a more sustainable future. From the boardroom to the locker room, from grassroots to global stages, the game is changing and so are we. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast with me, Claire Poole. I am so happy to be back with you for another new episode and a different topic to start the pod off this week. So what are we talking about? What we're talking about is something we need to survive. It's something that maybe a lot of us take for granted. You've probably got some next to you on your desk as you're listening, or if you're on the move, you might have it in your bag, or when you're getting to your destination, you might be dying for some as you arrive. What we're talking about is water. So what's up with water and why are we chatting about it on the pod this week? I've been thinking about it a lot because there was a report out recently from the UN that basically shared that the world has entered an era of global water bankruptcy, which sounds terrifying because of our water systems that are relied on by so many billions of people globally. Water is used for half of the world's food production, and these systems are being pushed beyond the point of recovery. It's a really, really critical issue. 4 billion people are facing severe scarcity of water for at least 1 month every year. So 4 billion people, or at least 1 month of the year, they are facing scarcity of water. 2.2 billion people are lacking safe drinking water as well. So where does this water crisis sit and how does it apply to us in this world of sport? For the last 3 years, certainly here in the UK and in many parts of the world, we've seen the hottest years since records began. Last year, 2025, was the hottest year ever recorded in the UK. Northern Europe, equally at the same time, is getting wetter. Central and Southern Europe are experiencing declining groundwater reserves. And these extremes that we talk about are no longer anomalies. They are becoming more and more patterns that we need to be aware of. Water also sits on the receiving end of climate impacts, so flooding, drought, groundwater depletion, water quality risks, as well as the need for more water as sport adapts to a changing climate. So whether it's hydration for athletes and participants and fans, water used for cooling machines as we continue our tournaments and matches and participation on these extremely hot days, or as we've seen most recently, water being used for snowmaking machines when winter competitions are taking place and we can't afford for competitions to be derailed by lack of snow. At the time of recording in February 2026, last week I spoke at a GEI 18 event, an event here in London hosted by A Greener Future to talk about this alongside some fantastic climate scientists and people in the world of music festivals, which obviously operate quite similarly to major sports events and have similar challenges and opportunities. So we dug into what's happening, what it means for the future of events, for music, for entertainment, for festivals and sport, because these sectors obviously culturally punch above their weight and we can use them not only to adapt, but also to mitigate some of these impacts. So I want to share some of the key takeaways of that session and some other factors that we spoke about. There was an incredible doctor on the panel, Dr. Mohammed Shamsudua from University College London, and he's a groundwater scientist and contributing author to the latest IPCC assessment. And what was really interesting was that he highlighted that although we talk about water risks and their exacerbation by climate change, they are exacerbated by human mismanagement, and we need to do better. So this was very interesting. Not only have we got the climate impacts, we're now mismanaging our water from a human level, and we've seen many examples of this. So I guess the takeaway for the sport industry from this is, even if you don't have a water reduction or a management plan in place, are you making sure you're using water as efficiently as possible? Where can you avoid waste? How can you use your voice or platform to highlight issues around water and take action? There's some things we can do. Jane Healy was another person on the panel who was brilliant. She does all of the water and sanitation for Glastonbury Festival here in the UK. And she shared that what used to be a contingency when it comes to water use is now business as usual, and we have to plan accordingly. So again, sports, especially touring sports or grassroots sports operating in the same way, we have to think about how are we planning our seasons for this extreme weather, whether it's more water that we need to provide because of extreme heat to ensure people are comfortable and safe, for rainwater collection, for efficiency measures, or flood planning. When it comes to our sporting events, no matter if you're at a grassroots level or an elite level, we have to start thinking about our planning. And what you might have put in as a contingency now is more likely season on season to be business as usual. Whilst adaptation is critical, of course, we have to adapt to the changing climate and take action as and when is needed. We need to mitigate more. And mitigate, obviously, is just really getting ahead of these issues. And an incredible speaker, Artur Mendes from Boom Festival in Portugal, which is operating in a very water scarce region, and they're dealing with a lot of extreme heat issues. He spoke about this mitigation and working with the local community and local governance and innovating, partnering around innovations as well. They've created compost toilets since 2006. They brought that in. They revolutionized their approach, sanitation and water in their loos, and they've collaborated with organizations, experts, and site-specific experiments to improve on these composting toilets. And each festival edition gives them a new opportunity to gain insights, to refine their techniques, and enhance the efficiency of the composting process. So they've used their platform to innovate and to drive. And obviously there's a water efficiency measure there. So again, in sport, how are we innovating? How are we using our platforms to be able to drive this change? Lastly, climate impacts are already determining the calendar. It came up in the session at GEI. Artur Mendes mentioned that the Boom Festival used to be in August. They've now moved it to July to try and avoid the worst extreme heat. And Professor Richard Betts, MBE, another speaker on the panel who is a climate scientist for the Met Office and also a professor at the University of Exeter, an IPCC author and advisor to the UK Climate Change Committee, told us all about the extreme heat only obviously worsening. So thinking about the calendar as we go forward is going to be really important. And we know in sport, especially during individual competitions, there has already been talk of moving calendars. Sebastian Coe very famously has spoken on behalf of World Athletics about a changing calendar, suggesting events such as the marathon may need to be held separately in future years at different times of the year to protect athletes from unsafe conditions. So it's something we're already thinking about considering, but a reminder that this is only going to get worse. Communication challenges popped up a little bit as well. Now more and more sport is taking action, especially elite sport is taking action in this area, whether it's collecting rainwater to use for irrigation, moving to waterless urinals, or putting water fountains in their venues, or trying to go to low flow taps. There's loads and loads of water efficiency measures in place. But it's about communicating these shifts as well. In 2022, climate activists in the south of France filled golf course holes with cement to protest against those golf courses being exempt from water bans amid a severe drought in the country. The exemption of these golf greens sparked controversy. Over 100 French villages were short of drinking water, but golfing officials said the greens would die within 3 days if they weren't watered. We want sport to continue. We want to ensure that everyone's needs are met, and we want to be able to continue the brilliant sport that we're all involved with. In these cases, we know more broadly that golf is doing a huge amount around using wastewater or grey water or using collection of rainwater to irrigate and trying to be more innovative and thoughtful around that. But of course, we have to make sure we communicate this as well, because if people aren't aware of this, we may go through periods where our sports fields are continued to be irrigated, even if it's reused water. But the perception is that water is being used, fresh water is being used to irrigate, whilst perhaps there's other bans or hose pipe bans or reduction or rationing in place depending on droughts that are happening. So we need to be really careful about the communications around that as well. In this area, sport is taking action. The Clean Water Sports Alliance here in the UK have come together to be able to use their collective action and their power to drive more change. And just last week, a number of MPs, they collected a number of government officials together for a meeting, and they've called for further and faster action on pollution in our waterways following this parliamentary event that was organised by the Clean Water Sports Alliance. So this is a great example of how sport can come together and use the collective power, not just to drive change within sport, but actually use the platforms and the memberships and the reach to use that power to drive change at government or a policy level as well. The collective power of sport helping to drive water reform is something that is already happening, as we know, and can happen elsewhere as well. So in summation, just to think about this, We're going to continue to experience more extremes, less predictability, greater pressure on our water systems, and compounding risk. If you are a sport organizer or a fan or a participant and you aren't already thinking in this way, time to start thinking about it and time to think about how we can make positive change, because we need preparedness instead of reactiveness. We need proper management of our water use. We need to focus on reduction and efficiency wherever possible. Ideally, we need to mitigate. We need to get ahead of these worst impacts by collaborating with others on innovations within our communities and using our platforms of voice to raise awareness and drive change as well. We do need to be aware of this wider picture that the social license to operate for sport isn't a given in a changing world where perhaps water is going to be rationed, or there are going to be bans, or there are going to be issues around drought. We need to consider that sports will not be exempt from these if there's issues with that. And that social license to operate is critical for our sports, especially at an elite level, to continue. So we need to be aware of that. Collaboration with others, absolutely critical. And how can we set our own policies and get involved with supporting proper regulation and policy within our own country or our region where we operate? Quick reminder that it's World Water Day on the 22nd of March every year. So if you're listening to this live as it comes out, that's coming out. So maybe you could plan something around that. If you're listening back to this, put that date in your calendar for future years, be aware it's happening, and maybe think about how you can drive change year on year around that date. I ended my session at the GEI event by saying the future of events is going to be shaped by crisis or by conscious redesign. And we want our sports to continue. We don't want climate change and water to become issues that mean we cannot continue with some of our major sports or our major competitions. So let's consciously redesign how we do what we do. Let's consider it. Let's take action, because we really don't want to be reshaping our industries crisis to crisis. There's an easy segue from this to our guest on today's podcast. In the UK, we already know about a third of grassroots pitchers are already losing 6 weeks to 2 months annually due to flooding, the opposite end of the spectrum of some of the things I've spoken about. But organisations across the UK are taking climate action supported by Sport England, an organisation that's led from the front in attaching funding to climate action planning. I was lucky enough to sit down with Denise Ludlam to talk about all different things, from incentivising action in sport at a governance level, environmental sustainability, grassroots and community sport, practical steps that can be taken, the maturity tool that they've created, which is useful for all sports organisations, no matter where you're based. This is a really good chat. I hope you enjoy it. I am really incredibly delighted to be joined by Denise Ludlam, who is Sport England's Environmental Sustainability Strategic Lead. So Denise has been at Sport England, I think now for 3 years, Denise? Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's nearly 3 years.
Nearly 3 years, wonderful. And before that, for many years, worked at Derbyshire Council on climate and sustainability policy as well. So a huge amount of knowledge from Denise around this really important topic. And so we want to start off, first of all, Denise, let's hear, we know what you do now professionally, but tell us a fun fact about you that like maybe people who even know you don't know, or people who are just meeting you for the first time. To give a picture of who you are, give us a fun fact.
A fun fact about me. For many years in my 20s, my only form of transport, apart from public transport and Shanks's pony, was a motorbike. And I rode around on different motorbikes, partly because they were pretty environmentally efficient, so hardly used any petrol because I only had a little tiny weeny motorbikes, as I'm a little tiny weeny person. And partly because I really wanted to understand how the internal combustion engine works and whether I could mend and take apart an engine, because people seem fascinated by engines and I thought it must be that I didn't know how they worked. I can now take a motorbike apart, put it back together. Am I interested in engines? Do I enjoy any aspect of that? And the answer is no. So each to their own, but
I love it.
Thank you.
I love it. Never before had I thought about you as like the Valentino Rossi of the sport and sustainability movement for Sport England. I love it. So that's very cool. We love to hear a little bit about you and our guests. For anyone who doesn't know Sport England's a national sport development and funding body So they use resources to boost participation, support grassroots sport, facilities, community programs, and other sporting initiatives across England. For people listening around the world, it's the same style of body that operates in many, many regions. So Sport Singapore, Sport New Zealand, Sport Canada. There's a similar organisation in Switzerland, in the Netherlands, and probably in your region as well. So just so you're familiar with the sort of organisation that Denise works for. And this series of the Climate of Sport podcast is about leadership. So why are we chatting to Denise and why are we chatting to Sport England? In 2025, Sport England changed the rules of the game when it comes to climate action, especially for community sport. In a first for organisations like theirs globally, they're systems partners. So some of the organisations I've mentioned that operate to boost participation or support grassroots sports and facilities and really work to level up access to sport and physical activity across the country. For the first time, they required if those partners wish to continue to receive funding, they need a climate action plan. No exceptions, no excuses. This was obviously an incredibly bold leadership move, but don't worry, the requirement is backed by loads of support. It's not just you have to do this and off you go. Sport England are obviously working incredibly hard to support that. And we're going to unpack what's changed, what that support looks like, tools that Sport England have created, particularly relevant, obviously, for people in England. But of course, we know our community who listens to the podcast is global, and you will find this information incredibly rich to apply to your own organisations in your own regions as well. So welcome to this conversation that is redefining climate action in community sport. So before we dig in to some of the specifics, Denise, let's set the scene a little bit around the wider context we're in just now. So we're recording in early 2026. Although it's never been more critical, we are still seeing pushback against terms like net zero, aren't we? And unfortunately, this work that we're doing around climate action and environmental sustainability is still viewed by some as nice to have rather than critical action that's necessary to ward off really the existential threat of our sports participation all the way up to elite sport. Give us your view on why you think sustainability is still seen maybe as less relevant or not, business critical, if you like, for grassroots and community sport.
I think we've got very involved in the detail and we talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. We need to bring it back down to the reasons why sustainability is really important. And it is an existential threat. So we need to talk the language that our audiences talk. And language has always evolved. So I've been involved in sustainability for several decades now, and before it was even called sustainability. And in that time, the language we use and how we influence people has continued to change. And we need to recognise that language continues to evolve. And that's how culture changes. So we need to keep to the point of why sustainability is important and not get lost in some of that technical detail about whether it's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, what that means, how many grams of carbon per whatever is emitted. Keep it real, keep it meaningful, and keep it relevant to people. So how does environmental quality affect people's lives, and how will it affect lives in the future?
Yeah.
I think that's really important. We need, as sustainability professionals, to talk the talk, recognising that the language does change, but the purpose remains the same. We are trying to improve the quality of life for people and for wildlife now and in the future. We need to stick true to that purpose, but use the language that resonates with our audience and our policymakers. And we know that influences culture. So language influences culture, and we need to influence culture as well through our language. So let's make it relevant to people.
Love that. And I think so at Sport Positive, we do a lot with elite organisations. You work primarily with grassroots organisations, and this idea that it's less relevant, it's actually diametrically opposed, isn't it? It's the opposite. These smaller organisations make a huge difference, don't they?
Yeah, a massive difference. So if we think about grassroots sport and physical activity, And if you think about every tiny little village or town or city across England, there is sport and physical activity occurring in all of those. So if each of those organisations and the people within them start to take some kind of sustainability action, and it doesn't have to be a great big grand gesture, it can be tiny weeny actions, but they all add up, they all make a change. And perhaps even more importantly, those little actions influence the culture around them, which collectively influences the national and even the international culture. So again, it's back to this, what's the current culture? What's the current zeitgeist? How can we influence that? And grassroots have this enormous potential that I think is pretty much unrealised at the moment. So we need to try and affect that change there.
Love that. So you said for grassroots organizations, they can make small changes, or they can drive things, it obviously all adds up. So give us some practical steps that actually help small sports organizations embed sustainability. You're not going to disagree. We're all the same. Budgets and capacity are always tight, right? So where do they start?
Budgets and time, always constrained. I've never known a time when they haven't been constrained in one way or another. But let's not let that stop us taking action. What I would say is, don't try and solve all the world's problems. Nobody should be trying to solve everything at once. Think about 2 or 3 areas that you can make a difference in, 2 or 3 actions, and focus on those. So that might be about choosing a renewable energy tariff, or if you've got facilities, putting solar panels or something equivalent on your roof. Sport England has the Movement Fund available to help with projects like this, where we understand it can increase participation. You might think about who you bank with, because money speaks. If think about where your bank puts its money, you might change the stuff that you are buying. You're buying stuff anyway, whether that's washing up liquid for your kitchenette, whether that's kit and equipment. Where are you buying it from? What happens to it when you finish? Can it be mended? Can it be repurposed? Is it biodegradable? So buy wisely. Choose a vegan or vegetarian diet if you're putting on catering, often cheaper, so you can possibly save money. Ask your board or your committee to think about the environment when you are making decisions. This way, you can start to influence not only your organisation, but the organisations you're dealing with. Find out what they're doing. Ask them for their environment policy or what they're doing. So you're, again, influencing that culture. There's loads of ideas on our Sport England website, the Buddle website, or our partners Basis's website. So have a look there.
Fabulous. I love this. And obviously, we do have people listening to the podcast from all over the world, but if you're outside of England, this is still really relevant to you. We'll put the links to those pages in the show notes as well, because take a look and see, like, all of that advice obviously is not region specific, but also some of the ways that Sport England are going about this work, we could replicate, in your region. The great thing about our community and what we do is that everyone is so open to sharing, like Denise's there. So you can go and have a look and use this as a use case to engender change wherever you are. So don't feel like because you're not in England, this isn't relevant for you, because it absolutely is. So Sport England have made this leadership move, which we spoke about at the top of the episode there, about requiring partners to have climate action plans, which is exactly the leadership obviously we need right now. We know from people who sit with inside sports organizations, when I chat to them, that the kind of where it's mandatory, that mandatory instruction actually helps, because top brass decision makers don't have a choice. You have to find the resource. And obviously, when things are mandatory, resource is found and things change. So it's an incredible push forward that isn't left to ad hoc projects or really passionate people doing it because they care, which is incredible. So within these climate action plans, Denise, and the process of systems partners looking at these, what do you think separates a really meaningful plan from one that maybe is a tick box exercise? The work is done, we've sent it to Sport England, we've ticked the box, but now it's just sitting there and gathering dust. Like, what do you think's the big separation?
Really good question, Claire, because the last thing we need is a beautifully presented sustainability action plan that then sits on a shelf and nothing ever happens with it. And this is something we've grappled with because I think there's so many resources on the internet. You could probably pretty much download an action plan and tweak it and have something that sits on the shelf. We do not want that. And that's been a really important question for us about how we can make sure any action plan is meaningful. So I would rather see a one-page action plan with 3 or 4 actions where it's clearly laid out who's doing that work, when they're doing it by, and how much the budget is, and what the barriers are to, and how you're going to overcome the barriers to delivery. So let's focus on the action. Brilliant if you had a beautifully presented, photos and everything, but it's not absolutely necessary. So clear actions and all that sort of smart objectives. So you know what you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing it, and the funding. Focus on things that are relevant to you, that work for you, and make sure that everybody in your organisation has a responsibility within that action plan. So sustainability is not one person's responsibility. Sustainability is everybody's responsibility. And that's a really tough thing to convey.
Yeah.
But to help people and to recognise that even having said all that, a sustainability action plan can simply sit on a shelf and nothing will ever happen. Here at Sport England, what we've now done is introduced a maturity tool, which allows you to judge where you are on that sort of sustainability journey, whether you're setting out or whether you think you're leading the pack and having this really positive effect on the world around you. We are asking people to tell us where they are on that journey. So that's another tool, along with all the other resources that I've already mentioned. That's another tool that can help you on that journey.
Tell us a little bit more about that. Is that freely available? Is it online for people to access? And tell us how it was developed, the role you think it's going to play. Tell us a little bit more about that. I know you presented it at the summit last year and the engagement around it actually was huge in your presentation and kind of people giving feedback and thoughts and everything. It obviously really resonated with the community. So I think it's helpful maybe to hear a bit more.
Yeah, so we've developed this tool and the feedback has been really, really positive because it sets out that sustainability journey. And even if we think some of those steps are really obvious, not everybody has that insight into sustainability. So people have really welcomed the simplicity of the tool. So what we did, we looked at that sustainability journey and we developed that journey into 5 steps. So progressing, starting out and progressing, starting and then progressing. And then you can become sustainable. But we didn't want to stop at being sustainable because we recognise we've already had rather a negative effect on the world. So we wanted to restore that and then regenerate. So there's 5 different levels on that journey. And we developed a whole series of actions across different themes, which might be about carbon emissions. It might be about spending your money wisely and contributing to the circular economy. It might be about biodiversity, etc. And we thought about actions you can take within your organisations and actions you can take to influence those around you. We developed a kind of a simple version of this and we tried it out on loads of our partners who gave us some very honest feedback. And so we've tweaked and changed, but we've tried to develop a tool that anybody, doesn't have to be in England, can be a big organisation or a little organisation. We've tried to kind of focus it on sport and physical activity, but I think you could probably apply it to other sectors as well, broadly speaking. So hopefully we have got a tool that people can just simply take and look, cast their eye across and very, very quickly within half an hour think, yeah, we're setting out, we're starting this journey, but there's an action I can do. I can take that. So there's a tool, there's resources to support that tool. We will continue to develop that. So for each of the actions within that maturity tool, there shortly with this year, what we hope to do is for each action to identify case studies, toolkits, and have links to those on websites. So you can simply press on an action that you think, yeah, my organisation can do that. And there's some guidance and support to help you do it.
Amazing. We'll put the link to that maturity tool as well in the show notes. If you're listening to this, you can click on the description and easily access that directly as well. I love this so far. I think the big themes I'm hearing are like, keep it simple. I love the fact, let's not overcomplicate things. Have a one-page action plan with meaningful actions. Smart. This has come up a lot recently. And I think it's an oldie but a goodie, let's say. Smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's been used in business and in marketing and in so many things for, I think, decades. But that's really helpful for climate action plans as well. And importantly, say who's responsible for what. So if, it's an amazingly accessible way to start. And then obviously the maturity tool is there for people who want to connect. So as I understand it, reporting against the tool's currently voluntary. So the kind of climate action plans and the link to funding, that element's mandatory. Then the maturity tool that you've developed and continue to develop that's going to be voluntary. But maybe some early indicators in the feedback you've received about whether it will become mandatory. So let's put you on the spot, Denise. Why not? What do you reckon? Is that going to legitimize things because it sort of supports that? Or do you think that's going to become more onerous for people? Like, tell us, we won't hold you to it forever, but tell us how you're feeling about that just now, or considerations.
I think this is a really important question. I think in terms of context, I think sustainability in sport has moved really quickly over the last 3 or 4 years. I think it surprised me how the sector has really galvanized about this and recognizes what a threat a changing environment and changing climate is to sport. So I think where we were a year ago even is not where we are now. So I think there's way more interest and enthusiasm for this. But I think if we step back from sport for a moment and look at that almost like a national and international context, I think the world of sustainability and that language and understanding is changing really rapidly. There's loads of political moves to, net zero's got a really kind of negative connotation at the moment, generally across the public. So it's partly about that language. But I think everybody recognizes everybody wants clean air. Everybody wants cheaper energy, more reliable, locally developed energy. Who would argue with that? Everybody wants a better quality natural environment around them. Nobody's arguing with any of that. They're arguing about the terminology. So how does the world in different sectors mandate action on these things and avoid the language? It's keeping this culturally relevant. And we've really struggled with this. I'm looking elsewhere about how they are trying to make things volunteer or mandatory to respond to. There are arguments for us to say to our partners, you need to tell us which level of maturity you are at now and where you're going to be in 2, 3, 4 years' time, whatever that time scale might be. I suspect we might end up there eventually in the way that action plans will be mandatory, because otherwise you've got an action plan, it can sit on the shelf. I think by making it mandatory that we want people to move forward, it does legitimize action within an organisation. But I absolutely recognise that there are very, very few of our partners, who have anybody who is responsible for this. It's normally kind of tagged onto somebody else's role. So we need to provide all the resources that are necessary for people to do that within their day job. And it should be part of everybody's day job.
Exactly.
So one of the other reasons for getting the feedback, whether that's mandatory or voluntary, on where people are on that sustainability journey, is we can identify which kind of themes are progressing well and where people are really struggling and where we need to provide more resources, or where there's already sufficient resources and we don't need to provide any more. So it helps us support the sector to move forward. So at the minute it's voluntary. Is it likely to become mandatory? I suspect so. You heard it here first.
I love it. I love it. And also the way it's going, I think to me, this raises a wider issue for sport of where sports organisations are providing funding. There's always usually information attached to that funding of expectations of how money is spent and what it's spent on. And to me, it's a very natural way to ensure this work happens as part of the wider effort in terms of that. So I think that's something maybe that sports organisations that do provide funding globally can think about the same. We see this in a lot of sectors. So it was fascinating and really helpful. You mentioned a little bit there about voluntary, mandatory, and obviously there is a lot of voluntary reporting happening. And we get questions a lot about, people will say to me, Claire, like, which one's right for us? Should we do a standard? What commitment should we make? We're already reporting under this. Like, does it make sense also to do this? So how is the Sport England requirements, say, working alongside UN Sports for Climate Action framework? If people are signed up to both, how do they work together?
I think most of these reporting systems are complementary, but they always ask for something slightly different in a slightly different way. And I think the sector as a whole needs to try and ensure that they really are complementary, that if you report on one, you can submit the same reporting in a way, or the same figures. You've not got to slice your figures in your data any other way, that you can report on there. I don't think we need any more schemes in terms of reporting. I think we've probably got, sufficient there. So across those schemes, we need to ensure that the language is the same and the requirements to a certain extent are the same as well. And we need to make sure that the resources that we provide complement all of those things as well. So I think they do complement each other, but those people that are setting up these schemes need to make sure that it's straightforward and simple and easy for people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And this collaboration area, depending on an international framework versus something local, that collaboration is really important, isn't it? And they say if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we need to go fast and far, don't we? So getting those to work together is really, really key. So what about accountability from you then? Do you hold yourselves to account around this?
There is some accountability, absolutely. I think Sport England needs to be able to hold its head up high when it comes to sustainability. So there is accountability in terms of we're a publicly funded body, so it's important that we lead the way. Let's be clear about that. So we ask all our papers that go to our board to set out any environmental considerations. We have to report to the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, who ask us about what we're doing on sustainability. We will be publishing our own assessment against the maturity tool to say where we are. And I should tell you now, we're at level 2, so we are progressing. So we're certainly not leading the pack in that sense. And we can definitely take loads more action. But we want our partners to hold us accountable. We shouldn't be lagging behind. We also, as I think you know, Claire, we have an external reference group that we have these very honest conversations, which are really interesting. You're a member of that external reference group. And we ask people to challenge us and say, are you doing the right thing? Are you doing the right thing internally? And are you doing the right thing to support the sector as well? We need to be accountable. We need to be able to step out there and say, here's a really good example that Sport England's done. And we know how difficult it is. And I do know how difficult it is.
Yeah. I think it's that transparency that's key. My experience in this area is nobody expects perfection. They just expect honesty and transparency. And I think doing the tool yourself in terms of, publicizing where you're at with it and then holding yourself account, as you said, the external working group is a real great cross-section of people there from all different areas that are coming at things from a different perspective that raise queries or concerns. So there's a great track record there of ensuring you are doing as much as possible. And I think that's really important. I think this transparency and not marking your own homework is absolutely critical because, as you've mentioned, the pushback against net zero, there's a lot of greenwashing claims. There's a lot of, shifting of reporting, especially in Europe and other parts of the world. So this having someone, externally feedback, I think we're going to see more and more of that. I think you're ahead of the trend, but I think it's a trend we're going to see more and more. So we're coming to the end of our chat, which I think has been incredibly rich and interesting in so many ways. And some of the elements we've brought through there, setting the frameworks, keeping it simple, incentivizing action, supporting progress, like all of this is the core pillars of sport leading the way on this work globally. So the theme of the podcast series at the moment is leadership. So what leadership insights do you think you can share from your journey so far? Acknowledging, as you have done transparently, that you haven't got all the answers and you're not perfect and you're not saying, follow us, we've got it all licked. But at the same time, I do believe that you are leading in the way you're going about this. So what insights would you have to share?
I think my sense is that all the solutions that we need to solve sustainability are already out there being practiced by someone. We just need to find out who that is and copy them. We need to copy and plagiarize. So talk to your partners, collaborate, don't reinvent the wheel, use your sphere of influence. The resources are pretty much out there. Just get on. And if I was to say one thing, take action and tell people you're taking action, because that has huge impacts that ripple across society.
I love it. That's a brilliant note to end on. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been fascinating. I think we've learned heaps there. I was delighted to be joined today by Denise Ludlam, Environmental Sustainability Strategic Lead at Sport England. It's time for the quickfire round.
What is going to happen first? The UK hitting net zero or drivers understanding how bike lanes work?
I think net zero, absolutely, because physics always wins in the end. And I think the allocation of road space is probably the only thing that's more controversial than climate science. So that one's going to go on forever.
What is more dangerous, greenwashing or climate deniers?
I think this one's fairly straightforward, greenwashing, because it just burns all of our time whilst everyone's congratulating themselves. Well, at least climate deniers are obvious.
You have to choose one. Turn every SUV into an e-bike or every MP into a cyclist.
This one is pretty straightforward as well. Absolutely turn every MP into a cyclist. Policy always improves dramatically once things like potholes become personal and action becomes really meaningful when the fear is shared by the people who are making the decisions.
What is one sustainability myth you wish you could retire forever?
I think that nudging individuals will fix in and of itself the system, and that system is designed to deliver the status quo.
If community sport had a climate superhero, what would their power be?
It would be to make the right choice feel normal as opposed to niche.
If you had to give sports climate future a team talk, what is the opening line?
Well, very much with the sporting theme, I think that this isn't an optional fixture. This is the game.
That is a wrap on this episode of The Climate of Sport. If this got you thinking, send it to the group chat, send it to your team or someone who cares about the future of the game. Follow, subscribe, and join us next time, because the biggest wins aren't just on the scoreboard, they're out there for the planet too. See you on the next one.